Welcome back to Oncology for the Inquisitive Mind, an early morning edition. I'm joined as always by my gorgeous co-host who had some technical difficulties this morning, but we'll forgive him because of his beautiful brown eyes, Dr. Michael Fernando. Michael, it is so good to see you this morning.
It's good to see you too, Josh. I'm very, very excited for our guest today. It's going to be a great episode.
And I must confess, Michael has been on call, so he has all the excuses in the world. So today's episode is with Mr. Jake Messier, and this is a deeply personal and important conversation. We're joined with this gentleman who is living with metastatic breast cancer. Jake has shared his journey openly and honestly, helping to challenge assumptions around breast cancer, particularly the reality this disease does not only affect women and that metastatic disease remains something many patients live with every day. In this discussion, we talk about the experience of diagnosis, treatment, identity, resilience, and what it means to navigate life with advanced cancer. Jake brings incredible insight, vulnerability, and perspective to the conversation that we believe will resonate with clinicians, patients, families, and anyone wanting to better understand the human side of cancer care. Jake, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, guys. I know it's early morning for you guys, but it's later in the day for me. So I appreciate you guys juggling the schedule for me. I appreciate it.
You've obviously got a wealth of experience that we don't really talk about on this show. That is the patient perspective. And I think it's something that oncologists really need to be aware of. But we always on this show like to start with the man, the myth, the legend, as it were, because you are, and I say this to patients all the time, you are so much more than just someone who happens to have cancer. Before you started this advocacy journey, this inspiring advocacy journey, where were you? What was your life looking at? Because we know that a diagnosis like this really can send a life off the rails.
Yeah, it was, my life was sort of an average life, right? A couple kids, building my own business, sort of trucking along. And then if you go way back prior to my cancer diagnosis in 2018, I had a stroke, a level 4 ischemic stroke. And at that point, I was over 300 pounds. I was completely stressed out. I didn't take care of myself very much. And that all led to that stroke. But it wasn't like an immediate wake up call. So I didn't start paying attention to those things right away, right? Like I probably should have been. It took a couple years. And so when December of 2019 came around and I was even heavier and all these other things, I decided to fix myself. And I didn't really know what that meant, but I decided to try and fix myself. So I went on this weight loss journey where I lost 120 pounds and I flipped over every emotional stone in my soul. Not to be overly dramatic, but I went after what I believed was the root causes of this weight gain and this emotional turmoil. So I went on this extensive journey through yoga and meditation and Reiki and everything else to sort of get my mind straight. And I did that from 21 to 22. And then all of a sudden I get breast cancer, right? And I'm like, wait, what? I've spent this time bettering myself, becoming the best version of myself that I could be, right? And then in March of 2023, I was putting on deodorant and I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, there's a lump there. Well, that's weird. And I just went on with my day, right? It wasn't anything too concerning at the time. And another month went by and the lump was still there. And I was like, well, all right, it'll go away eventually or whatever. And rolling through another couple months, I got to July and I was like, well, I have a primary care physician appointment in a couple weeks. So I'll just add this to my list, right? I'm 52 years old at that point. I'll just add this to my list of things I need to talk to my doctor about. And I did. And that's why I went in there and basically he looked at it and listed off about 10 things that it might be, none of which were cancer. But then decided in an abundance of caution, let's send you to get a mammogram anyway. And that was my first time in the breast cancer world where I was like, wait, what? A mammogram? Like, what are you talking about? Like, I didn't even know that was a thing that guys could get. And that was the beginning of this journey, right? That was in August of 2023. And I was diagnosed at the end of the month with stage 2 invasive ductal carcinoma. And I tell the story about how I used to tell the story differently, right? I went from stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4 in like 8 months. I now understand that's not how staging works and understand how cancer works. So basically, I was misdiagnosed stage 2. I should have been diagnosed stage 3. And then due to progression, I ended up with stage 4. But those early days of diagnosis, it was, it's one thing. And you guys are oncologists. And so you guys are delivering the news all the time with, hey, you got cancer. And so the hey, you got cancer conversation is upending enough, right? That's a huge thing. But then when it's a weird one, right? One that doesn't fit into the mold of everybody else, right? The day after I get diagnosed, I get handed this stack of resource paperwork, right? It's got all the brochures and all the things I'm supposed to read through about breast cancer. And I'm reading it, and none of the people look like me. None of the people, it's all written for she and her. And, it's not even gender neutral. It is completely feminine. And to be honest, every picture in there was of a 70-year-old white woman, right? It had nothing to do, like, it wasn't even diverse in other categories, right? It just was all just old white women. And I'm like, none of this looks like me. None of this sounds like me. Yes, I can extrapolate. I'm a smart guy. I can extrapolate that these things can come over here and be to men. But it was the first time when I started realizing, I'm like, look, I have breast cancer, but I don't really belong here. At least that's what I thought.
And so it's an interesting thing, you've got this diagnosis, a misdiagnosis, and over 8 months, your world has changed from this is all curable. Let's cut it out, maybe give you some endocrine therapy, and, you move on with your life with some hot flushes, to 8 months later having metastatic disease.
Right.
With that process, I guess my question is, did you have to advocate for yourself for them to do a scan, to look for other spots? Like, how did that happen that you ended up with the metastatic spot? And then
Sure.
the second part is like, how did it, I appreciate, like, the old white women you don't resonate with, understandably, you're not an old white woman. And how did that make you feel trying to traverse the journey of having a cancer diagnosis? That was the other question I had.
99% of all breast cancer cases are women, right? And that's not hyperbole. That's the data. 99%, and 1% is men. In the US, that's going to be about 2,800 men a year. I did an Australian podcast yesterday, and so I actually know the numbers for Australia. It's about 211 guys in Australia will get it, right? About 20,000 women, about 211 guys. So, it's a small number, right? But it's still a number, right? We're not talking about 1 or 2 people. We're talking about, in the US, 3,000 men are going to get this, right? It's a number. But when you are told you have a women's disease, right? And then every single thing backs up the fact that it is truly a woman's disease, right? The pink and flowered waiting rooms, the stack of resources that I got that had all just women and she and her in it, right? I go to Dana-Farber in Boston, right? It's a world-renowned cancer center in a very liberal part of the United States, right? And I still walk into the Susan F. Smith Center for Women's Cancers, right? And I'm like, guys, come on, like, I belong there. Even, I understand how philanthropy works as well, that Susan F. Smith paid a lot of money to have her name on that wall, but it's factually incorrect, right? And so all of these microaggressions and sometimes full-on aggressions, right? I've been told to my face that men have too much voice in this world and you don't need to take mine away from me. And I'm like, listen, I'm not trying to take your voice away from you. I'm just trying to get mine heard. And so all of these things. I've been turned away from support groups, right? Because of my gender, because women need a safe space. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but so do I, right? This one organization had a breast cancer support group and a metastatic breast cancer support group. Do you guys know why they're not combined? It's pretty funny. It's funny to me anyway. The reason why they're not combined is because when you are stage 0 to stage 3, right? When you stick a bunch of metastatic people in there, we represent their worst nightmare, right? We represent everything that they are terribly afraid of. So many places will have a breast cancer support group and then a metastatic breast cancer support group. And it's not for the metastatic people to get more services. It's literally to keep us separated so that we don't, send the breast cancer support group down a hole. So, but I was told that I couldn't join either one of these organizations because they were both for women, right? And, this was just a local cancer nonprofit that was near me. And I was just trying to go sit in a room with other breast cancer patients, right? Regardless of gender. I just wanted to go sit in a room and commiserate. There's I can do this on Zoom all day long, right? But sitting in a circle with a facilitator and it's different, right? Doing it in person. And I understand to a point why, but at the same time, it doesn't make my mastectomy scar go away. It doesn't make my breast cancer diagnosis go away just because you don't want to let me in. So these are the things that are pervasive. And these are also the psycho and social issues are one of the reasons why male breast cancer is 30% more fatal than female breast cancer, right? It's, that's a massive number, a 30% gap. And one of those reasons is because men are diagnosed later, right? And in the case of me, I put it off for 6 months, right? And then it progresses during that time. It's also a matter of once you get into it, you're into this big pink umbrella, this big pink world. And you either need to be okay with that and sort of involve yourself with it, or you're really on the outside, right? And for so many men, they don't want to be involved with the pink and the flowers. When I went in for my mastectomy, and the OR nurses were trying to help me. They were looking out for me, right? They were not being mean to me. But the OR nurses, when I was coming out of my anesthesia after my mastectomy, they were like, "So we didn't put a surgical bind on you." And I'm like, "Why?" I mean, the bind, for everybody that's not a doctor here, the bind sort of keeps everything in place after you get some abdominal surgery, right? And they didn't put the bind on me because the only ones they had in the OR were pink and flowers. And so they were looking out for me and trying not to emasculate me in that moment. But I'm like, guys, of course I'm going to put out a medical device. Like, please put it on me. But that's the level that is pervasive throughout breast cancer. So there's some significant mental health stuff that goes on beyond just getting the cancer diagnosis, which can be incredibly, difficult on its own. Then you throw in, I don't belong in this disease, and the disease, some people in the disease don't even want me there. It's a really hard road to navigate. Mine, once I found my lump and once it was determined to be breast cancer, sort of everybody was on board, right? I didn't have one of those situations where I was turned away. I have it's funny, I have lots of military buddies, right? I was in the Marine Corps for 10 years. And I have military buddies that are very well aware that not only do I have breast cancer, but, it could be tied to my service, right? So they're all very piqued by this. And so, but one of my friends, he went in for his annual physical and he asked the doctor to show him how to do a self breast exam, right? Yes, I've looked it up on YouTube, but can you just show me real quick how to do it? And the doctor flat out refused to do it. And he said, and he was like, well, why? And he goes, male breast cancer is so rare that I don't think it's worth the time of me showing it that you don't, I don't think that you're going to get it. But that was the level, like my buddy was pissed, he was upset that he couldn't even get that attention during that. And nothing's going on with his chest or anything. He just wanted the information, but it wasn't really given to him. So I go to my previous cancer center. I am there and I'm sort of misdiagnosed stage 2 into stage 3. at that point, I decided to go to Dana-Farber in Boston. Okay. Dana-Farber gets all my scans, and they start looking and we're like, well, let's do our own scan. And on their own scan, they saw a spot of metastasis on my hip, right? That's where they were like, okay, it's my upper trochanter, which I didn't know that was a thing until I went down this journey. So my upper trochanter has a lesion on it. But here was the problem. I did several biopsies, which came back inconclusive. I did all this stuff. And so there's about a 10-month period where they don't know if it's a spot of inflammation or if it's a tumor, right? So Mass General, which is the big Boston hospital that's attached to Dana-Farber, Mass General, the ortho team, the orthopedics team, is saying it's inflammation, and the oncology team is saying that it's metastasis, right? And obviously, I'm rooting for the ortho team, right? I'm rooting for it to be stage 3 to be not, to be curable. But in October of 25 is when they finally were able to get a good, clean biopsy. A biopsy on my hip lands me in a wheelchair for 6 to 8 weeks every time they do it, because they basically have to do a controlled fracture of my hip to get the needle in down there deep enough to get it. And then because they were like, oh, you can be on crutches. And I'm like, have you guys seen my underarm with my mastectomy? This is a mess. I can't be on crutches. I can't, and so that lands me in a wheelchair. So, there is, all this stuff that goes on. October of 25, they finally determined, yes, this is a tumor. Yes, we can start treating. But I lost a lot of time in there, right? Where they were not treating that. And as soon as they figured out what it was, I went in for another round of radiation. I had done my initial radiation for my entire chest wall, and I went in for radiation specifically for my hip. And we just got those results in a PET scan back probably about a month ago at this point. And it came back that tumor is either dead or dying, which is fantastic, right? That's what they said. It's harder to tell in bone, to tell if it's, what's going on rather than soft tissue. So, I didn't face those struggles. Once people knew what I had, I was in a good place. I didn't have to advocate for myself. In fact, I didn't even know what I was talking about. So I'm glad that people proactively put me in situations that I could get help in, because I didn't even know what to ask for.
It's all of those things that us on the other side of the table, as it were, or on the other side of the medical desk really don't see, I think, and it's something that doctors. I mean, you mentioned the with your military friend and the doctor just not examining or not even teaching them how to do an examination. It's something that we really don't see. And I guess the easy follow-up question here, Jake, because you obviously channeled a lot of the energy and a lot of that passion from your experience into your advocacy work, and we'll come to that in a bit. But at the time when you were going through both the diagnostic uncertainty, the discrepancies in approach from support groups between men and women for breast cancer, and then the second diagnostic uncertainty with this hip lesion, I guess the obvious question is, how did you cope? How did you manage with that? Because that sounds like something that no one person, regardless of sort of what else is going on, can deal with.
Well, I mean, it was a lot. It's funny, people say, oh my gosh, you're the strongest person I know. And I'm like, I didn't have a choice, right? I don't have a choice when it comes to this. It's either that or go home and die, right? Those are my two options, right? Is to either fight or not, right? And so I will tell you, I mean, and I'm sure you guys say it all the time, because I haven't heard a physician or oncologist not say that having a positive attitude certainly benefits you going forward, right? There's physiological things that happen with a positive attitude. But I will say that the advocacy itself, the advocacy was not born out of a need to change things. The advocacy was born out of I need to have a purpose, right? And so I I spent 30 years as a marketing executive and a PR guy in Boston nonprofits, right? And when I got sick, I at that time I owned my own marketing agency, and we were the largest marketing agency in New England for nonprofits, and we had big accounts and big clients. And for the first 2 years of me being sick, I ran my agency, right? And I'd have chemo in the morning, and then I'd come back and do, client calls and write press releases and social content and everything in the afternoons, right? That was my life. But when I got to the point where, and I did that because I was like, well, everybody's telling me along the way that I'm just going to be fine in a year, right? That I just have to sort of do my time in the chair, and then I'm going to be okay in a year. But once I realized that I was never going to get better, right? That this was going to be my life. That's when I sort of transitioned out of my agency. I sold it to my trusted lieutenant who had been with me since day one. And then I transitioned into, well, now what the hell am I going to do? I had a significant background in PR, social media, advertising, content creation, design, advertising strategy, all of these things, right? And so what I decided to do was take all of those skills and turn them on to the branded channels that I have now, right? Which is at the guy with stage 4 breast cancer. Understanding that, okay, I understand how I've been working in social media for 20 years, right? I've been working in PR and marketing for a long time. So I get how these things work. So at first it was, well, I'm just going to start documenting my journey on social media like a lot of people do. There's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people online documenting their cancer journey, right? And for the most part, and I don't mean to disparage anybody that's documenting their journey, but for the most part, they are incredibly depressing. Like, it is really, it's like if somebody just goes on their channel and they just cry about having cancer like every day. And look, I get it. It's not easy. But I was like, this can't be what I do, right? This can't be, yes, I have hard days and yes, I cry on camera and it doesn't bother me at all, but like it doesn't, like that can't be what I do, right? So I started doing a little bit of, hey, guys who get breast cancer, like really basic things. And they started catching on. And I was like, well, all right, well, let's see where this goes. And it went, right? I have the largest male breast cancer accounts in the world, which is still incredibly tiny and small, which is funny, right? I'm the guy with male breast cancer, right? But, I have 50,000 followers across my platforms, right? Which, having been a marketing guy and a social media guy, I understand that 50,000 followers does not an influencer make, right? I get that. But 50,000 people in the cancer world is a big number, right? And 50,000 people in the male breast cancer world is even bigger. And so your question of how did I cope with it? I made purpose in my life, right? I gave myself something to do when I wasn't going to be working full time. But B, I created a community, right? Before I came along, there wasn't this community of 50,000 people interested in male breast cancer, right? But they get me through so many of those hard days, right? This community is really amazing, right? And as much as as people tell me that I do for them, right? I can tell you that I wouldn't be here if I didn't have this job to do every day, right? And my job is very simple. It's, can I reach 30 people a day? This was my initial business plan, right? I need to reach 30 people a day, and so that they can know that men can get breast cancer, right? And that was all I was trying to do, right? 30 people a day. That's all I have to reach. And I'm reaching a lot more than that now, but the mission is still the same, right? The mission has not changed. I'm not there selling male breast cancer merch, and I'm not out there doing, it is literally advocacy. Hey, guys can get breast cancer too. And you need to know that. And regardless of who you are, my wife and I talk about it all the time, that we talk to people with RN and MD next to their name, right? And that have said that guys can't get breast cancer. And I'm like, wait, you're a medical doctor and you're supposed, like, what do you mean you're telling me that guys can't get breast cancer? my wife was just at her mammogram a couple of weeks ago, and I'm not sure who was working the desk, whether it was a mammogram tech, whether it was a nurse. It doesn't really matter. The woman was working a mammogram desk, right? So my wife, when she goes in for her mammogram, she explains that, she's a little bit hypersensitive towards breast cancer simply because of what's going on with me. And the woman at the front desk of the mammogram center told her that men can't get breast cancer, even though my wife just told her that I currently did. Like, it was, so this is the stuff that makes my blood boil, but also gives me content for the next day, right? To go out and do that and to try and change the world. So, look, I have not been given you've got, 8 months to live or anything like that, right? But I'm going to use my time, whatever time I have left, to making sure that people know that men can get breast cancer, because it's not just men. I mean, yes, men are obviously need to know for themselves, but women need to as well. I mean, it's something like it's 85% of people that have breast cancer directly in their lives, right? Whether they're a patient, whether their mom has it, whether their sister has it, whether their wife has it, whatever. 85% of those people don't know that men can get breast cancer. So we've got a lot of work to do from all the perspectives, right? It's like whenever somebody wants to talk about male breast cancer on their podcast, hell yeah. Like we'll go on there and we'll talk about it with anybody.
It's an interesting point you made that when your wife goes to get her own mammogram, the receptionist or the person at the front, doesn't matter, as you said there, dismisses you. And I think that's kind of this key paradigm shift that, Jake, I want you to explore this a little more, that like in healthcare, and at least the way Michael and I have been trained, and yes, there are differences, stark differences between the US and Australia, but this whole idea of dismissing someone in a healthcare setting can be quite dangerous for any
100%.
number of reasons. And so you've got this advocacy platform, which you've done incredibly well with. And yes, I appreciate it. It's small, but also it's a niche. It's a niche advocacy, much
I'm
like
a unicorn, right?
Yeah,
I don't
much
have
like
a lot of competition.
Our teeny weeny podcast. But what I wanted to ask you is like, what are you? Yes, it's given you purpose. It's given, I guess, male breast cancers a voice. But what do you want to achieve apart from, I guess, you're advocating for people to be aware? I get that. But then what is that next step that you want people and our listeners to understand about men with male breast cancer? Is it that they should have extra support? Is it that it needs to be kind of this paradigm shift that, hey, you shouldn't dismiss people? Like, what are you wanting? What's your golden chalice here?
The pie in the sky, the thing that I want, there's two things. There has never in the history of breast cancer research, not male breast cancer, in the history of breast cancer research going back 70 years to the 1950s or 1960s, there has never been a male breast cancer study on the differences between male and female breast cancer, ever, in the history of this disease. And you're talking about the disease that is the most funded, the most researched, the most looked at, the most everything. Breast cancer in the US is the disease, right? If you're going to have one, that's the one to have. But men don't fit into the research. We're such a statistical anomaly that, will throw off the data if you're expecting men to be there and they're not, or there's, and so right now at Dana-Farber, there is currently a tiny little clinical trial, 60 people, that is endocrine therapy specific. And that is the first major, and I put major, and it's a really tiny one with only 60 people in it. It's the first time that anybody has put any effort or research or funds into male breast cancer. So the first thing that I would like to see is equitable funding for research. And when I say equitable, I do not mean 50-50 at all. I mean, I would like to see 1% of breast cancer research and breast cancer funding go towards male breast cancer, right? That's 1%. It's not a lot, And when I talk to people, they're like, well, what are you going to do with 1%? What if 1% is only like $300,000? And I'm like, well, you know what's better than 300,000? I mean, $300,000 is a lot better than having zero. Like we have zero now. So having 1% would be a massive uptick. And what you could do with that 1%, with that $300,000 or whatever, I talked to a lot of researchers, and the researchers are like, Jake, you could have $10 million and give it to us, and I couldn't do any male breast cancer research. And I'm like, why? He goes, I've never had a male mouse in my lab. I've never even had male DNA to work with. And so you're talking about researchers that have only ever worked with female DNA and female mice, right? They've never even brought in male DNA. So I'd like to see not just 1% of the funding. And that is a very easy ask, right? It's very difficult that if you're giving $1 million, if you're a foundation and you're giving $1 million for breast cancer, if I'm like, hey, I only want 10,000, like that's you know, you got to be a real jerk to sort of pass that up, right? And so I'd like to see funding at an appropriate level that actually makes an impact for men, right? The second thing that I'd like to see, and this, I mean, I've said that it could be me, but it doesn't have to be me, right? What I want to see is at the national level, you know, in the US anyway, the Susan G. Komens, the National Breast Cancer Foundation, the Breast Cancer Research Foundation, they should all have a full-time dedicated employee working on male breast cancer programming, right? That's what I'd love to see. Because then when you're a breast cancer patient and a male, and you look towards Susan G. Komen, right, as that big foundation in the States, and then but you see a guy in there, like that's what I'd like to see, is men in positions helping affect change like that. Now, I think that is changing a little bit. Susan G. Komen recently asked me, I went through an interview process and an application process and all these things, but they invited me to join their Metastatic Breast Cancer Steering Committee, which looks at every aspect of what Komen does and puts it through the lens of metastatic disease. And are we meeting the needs of our metastatic patients, right? This is the first time that Susan G. Komen has ever had a male patient on any of their boards, right? They've had male physicians, they've had male donors and funders, but they've never had a male patient giving the male perspective. And so the fact that I was asked to join this board does show that there is change happening, right? That these things, you know, I've gone in front of the National Breast Cancer Foundation and said, hey, I would love to see 1% of the money that you send to all these other organizations to go towards male breast cancer research. And they took it a step further. Their VP of programming took it a step further. And he's like, Jake, it's not just about money. What if I dedicated 1% of our staff time to male breast cancer? And I was like, now you're thinking, right? Because he goes, I guarantee we don't spend 5 hours a year dedicated on male breast cancer as an entire organization, right? I guarantee we don't. As an organization, we don't. But if I got everybody in the organization, from the finance team to the accounting team to the program team to the marketing team, if everybody spent 1% of the year, 3.5 days, do you know how much we could do for male breast cancer if we just put 3.5 days? And that's not a lot, right? But 3.5 days dedicated to that. And that's all we're looking for. So when you ask me what I want, it's those things, right? They're not big asks, right? And they're almost like, well, why isn't that happening already? But it's also one of those things that is a lift, right? And I say this all the time: the people in power, regardless of the situation, this doesn't have anything to do with breast cancer, right? The people in power have to allow the people not in power a seat at the table. You're never going to break your door down when it's 99% to 1 of, hey, I need to sit at the table, right? The women in this case have to allow men a seat at the table. And that's what is slowly happening. And that's what I'm seeing over the past couple of years.
Jake, I'll let you in on a little secret. As you know, we've got this little list of questions, and I think Josh and I have asked about 3 of them, and you've answered pretty much all of the questions that we've had.
Sorry.
Which no, I think it speaks to your eloquence and your practice and your passion that you just sort of go from one question to the other so naturally. We do have one last question though before we let you go, because we know you're a very, very busy man. And I guess it's a little bit different to the questions we've asked, because we've been talking a lot about your journey in the past and everything that you've gone through. But if you could sort of go back and give yourself some advice and think about, what if you knew sort of where you were heading and what you were hoping to achieve in your advocacy role, but give yourself some advice. What pearls of wisdom would you wish had been given at an earlier stage? And it doesn't have to be, at the time of your diagnosis. It can be earlier. But what do you wish that you knew?
Funny. I do a lot of these podcasts. I was telling Josh before we got on, I do like 6 to 8 of these a week, and I don't think I've ever been asked that question. Probably to give yourself the grace that I give sort of everybody else, right? It is very easy for me to give people the grace at this point in my life, in whatever the context or the situation is, right? But I am very, very, very hard on myself and very critical of myself and how I'm doing this and what I'm doing. And so I have to remind myself constantly. And the audience that my social audience does a pretty good job of that as well, of reminding me and thanking me for what I'm doing, right? There are times when I go to record something and I'm just like, what the hell am I going to say today, right? I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what's going to impact the audience. And the audience, I mean, I guess lets me off the hook, but I will tell you this, that my patience with myself and my abilities at this point, right? There are things that I just can't do anymore, right? I have lymphedema considerably in my right arm, right? There's things that I cannot do physically anymore. There are things that are harder for me to do mentally and emotionally, right? I used to be a chief marketing officer for huge brands. I don't have the ability to do that on a consistent basis anymore, right? There are days when you get flashes of brilliance of Jake the CMO, and then there's other days when I'm like, yeah, I'm not getting out of bed today. And so, but not being so hard on myself that I'm not living up to the person that I was, right? And then flipping that over and saying, how much more rich am I because of this disease, right? How many more lives have I affected? Before I was affecting my employees' lives and a couple other people, right? I'm affecting thousands of people's lives that now for the positive, and you have to look at that as a gift, right? You have to look at that as an opportunity. You have to look at that as if I wasn't doing this, I'd be squandering the opportunity and the 30 years of, I was a DJ and I was a news anchor and my ability to talk on air and all of these things I have, right? And if I didn't do this, if I just sat at home and decided to not talk about this, it would be a waste. And again, I sort of have to give myself grace. So giving myself grace is sort of the running theme throughout this, because there's a lot of things that I could be doing, but I get to do this. There's so many people, I am honored to get to do this, regardless of my own diagnosis, my prognosis, how much time I have left. I consider myself to be the steward of this portion of the male breast cancer timeline, right? There's going to be somebody that comes along 2 or 3 years from me that does it so much better than I do. And that has, I'm never going to be upset at the guy that passes my social media follower count. I'm going to cheer that guy on, because I want that only means that this is only getting better for guys out there, right? one last anecdote. There was a couple weeks ago, a guy wrote me and he said, I've been following you for about a year. And I was stage 2 breast cancer about 12 years ago. And the only people that knew were my 2 kids, my wife, and my parents. Everybody else just knew I was sick or I had cancer or I was way too embarrassed to ever say the words breast cancer, right? But he goes, after watching you for a year, I decided that I was finally brave enough to change my Facebook profile to breast cancer survivor, right? And the amount of love and support and outpouring of all those things was great. But that's what I want, right? I want guys to not feel so afraid and alone and isolated in a disease that is already fearful and isolating and alone, right? I don't want people to have that, what's already piled on there. So, I have to remind myself of that every day, that I'm doing this for a reason. And I have to remind myself that I am making that impact that I wanted to be making. My wife always said, you wanted to be famous, right? Well, here you go. And that's where I think, I try to make sure that the people that I am communicating with every day are entertained, are happy in their own skin, right? There's a lot of that in mind. You just be a good person, just be happy. Like, the rest will sort of take care of itself. And then the cancer stuff, just navigate your way the best way you can. But being positive is the best thing that I can recommend for you.
Jake, I think Michael probably will agree with me. Maybe he won't. But, a man is the sum of his parts. And as one of my old mentors said, when you're altruistic, and that's exactly what you're doing, Jake. You're making change for not so much yourself, but probably for people, in 5, 10, 15, 20 years time. And as for those on YouTube, as you can see on your t-shirt, Rosa Parks, very, very famous. Even us down under know the story very well. But like the dial doesn't move unless people actually have the conversation. So Jake, thank you for coming on the show. Michael, thank you for giving up your morning, knowing that you have been on call. I appreciate you both. Look forward to having you back as your advocacy role increases.
Thank you so much, guys. This was fantastic. I really appreciate you both.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Oncology for the Inquisitive Mind, produced by ADC Productions, with the assistance of education grants from Pfizer, Gilead Pharmaceuticals, and Merck Pharmaceuticals. As always, these companies do not receive early previews or editorial input of any kind. The opinions expressed in this episode are our own, and the facts are, well, the facts. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing to be among the first to hear our latest forays into the ever-changing world of medical oncology. You can find previous episodes of our show, including coverage of major conferences, interviews with world-renowned experts, and much more at inquisitiveonc.com. If you would like a particular subject covered on the show, drop us a line at inquisitiveonc@gmail.com. And if you happen to be in Australia, stay tuned for details about exciting in-person events we have planned for the near future. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to demystifying oncology again next time.